Well, thank you all for, is it on? Are we good? Well, thank you all for inviting me here today. I'm here to talk about New York City parks. What's next? Just so that you know my background, I spent my entire career being an urban planner, both starting here in New York, went down to Washington, D.C., then I went to Raleigh, North Carolina, and returned here in May. I planned for entire cities, so it's very exciting just to focus on parks, but I see parks as a vital piece of infrastructure that's connected to other things. It doesn't sit in isolation. And so I believe that I may be the first planner to run the Parks Department since Robert Moses, and I don't know if you want to call Robert Moses a planner, but if someone said they had to describe me, if Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs had a baby, it would probably be me. So that gives you some point of context. So as I go into the presentation, initially starting off, there were 5 primary goals that I was asked to address as Parks Commissioner, but I'm excited about thinking about what's next for New York City parks. And the ones that we're focusing on, at least in the short term, are equity, resiliency, sustainability, innovation, and quality of life. I'm going to focus on this one point. I'll give him a chance because no one hears it, don't worry. But if you all know the 3 legs of sustainability, the environment, the economy, and equity, I have to tell you that equity is the one that no one can figure out and most people ignore when they're dealing with sustainability. And I personally believe if you're not dealing with equity as part of the 3 E's, then you're not being sustainable. And so we had to define what that term equity means, and that was one of my biggest challenges because there was a lot of conversation about equity in our system. So I'll talk about one of our early initiatives, but I'll come back to that term equity. So these were the initial challenges that we had to address, and I made a commitment. I'm trying to remember which, I should have got instructions on which button. Okay, now I know which one. Back up here for a second. It is quite sensitive. It is this button, right? Right here?
There you go.
Okay, here we go. So for the first 100 days, I made a pledge that I wanted to at least accomplish 4 things to let people know that there was a change in the way we're approaching parks. And so the first is I truly wanted to develop a plan for park equity. That's what New Yorkers are really crying out for. It was a big topic both by the mayor and during the campaign. Number 2, to create a planning and development presence on our homepage. And when I was interviewing for the job, I noticed there was a lot about recreation, but what about planning for the future for our park system? And so we want to make sure there was a strong presence. We wanted to also streamline, we also want to develop an online tracking system. We have a lot of projects and the public wanted to know what is happening with my park. And so we wanted to, for the first time, have a very transparent tool so the public can see exactly what's happening with their capital projects. And then finally, we wanted to develop some recommendations to streamline our capital planning process. I've been doing this for a lot of years. New York, it could take up to 4 years to just do one project. And so we heard loud and clear we have to provide and bring these assets to New Yorkers as quickly as possible. Okay, it's jumping to. Getting to see a nice preview is actually going the wrong direction. Okay. Am I getting help up there? All right. Okay, it's jumping around. Well, the whole point is we wanted to go ahead and create a bright green future with a more inclusive and innovative park system. Okay, I think there's something wrong with the remote. Could you just tell me which one? Because it is these 2 buttons, correct? Because it is jumping around and. Okay, so it's these right here? Okay, I apologize. And so we launched what was called the Community Parks Initiative, which is our framework for a more equitable future. And when we looked at these equity initiatives, I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see essentially there are going to be these 9 far-reaching initiatives that essentially are going to deal with our issue of equity. Now, there was a slide that jumped ahead, and I wanted to get a chance to describe it to you. But in order to put park planning in context, there are essentially 4 eras in park planning. The first was the garden movement. Parks were these beautiful gardens, basically in Europe, that people just sat there to just observe, to enjoy the beauty of parks. Really, they were just gardens. And that was the first generation that carried here to the US. And there were these beautifully planned gardens where people just sat and enjoyed and meditated in the beauty of nature, but they were gardens. That ended until about, I would say, the mid-19th century. Then we had the landscape architecture movement. Frederick Law Olmsted, where for the first time, land was now shaped, where you had lakes and ponds and views and architecture and paths and meadows and lawns, and now people can experience this unique space like Central Park. And that went on till about the 1930s, and many of our parks throughout the United States were influenced in now this new profession of landscape architecture. Then we went into a new era from 1930 to 1965. This was the recreational program era, AKA Robert Moses, where because, and I think you saw a picture from the low line, of the density in New York, we had to find spaces to pack recreation and recreational programs, and that went till about the 1965. And some people are still in that era. But then we had the natural environment era, environmentalism, a return to the city, where now after the post-industrial era, we reclaimed our waterfront, we started cleaning up brownfields, and parks started to be developed in places we wouldn't imagine. The High Line, Brooklyn Bridge Park, reclaiming these incredible spaces. But now that we're in the 21st century, the big question is, what's next? And our first response to this is that we have to deal with this issue of equity because we realize as our city is growing, things are changing. What's also important, and I think all of you can relate, as you grow up, the places around you form memories of whether it's a church or a restaurant or a street, but about public spaces where you had family gatherings, where you played as a child. And so we recognize the importance those memories serve as we grow up about how we experience parks and public spaces. But now we want to create new memories for present and future generations. So it's very important as we look at some of these public spaces in these very dense areas, how do these young people experience public space? And what memories can we give them in New York City to carry forward for the rest of their lives? I grew up 2 blocks from Prospect Park. I learned how to ride a bike. I covered every path, every inch, and those memories have stayed with me to this very day. I can close my eyes and imagine every single inch of Prospect Park, and I don't know what it would be like growing up in Brooklyn with that beautiful asset literally in my backyard. In fact, it was my backyard. And so we want to make sure we provide that same legacy for future generations. So to put things in context, the city of New York spent close to $6 billion over the past 2 decades to build some of the incredible parks that you see today. But we did an analysis and found out when we look at equity, which is fairness, we look at equity, we wanted to find out how many parks in our city over the last 20 years received less than $250,000, and it turned out there were 215. Hiding in plain sight. Generations of young people that did not have the memories that we had because they did not have those incredible resources. And there they were. So we used the equity lens and uncovered 215 parks. So we decided, which was announced last month, to give $130 million to start on the first down payment of 35 parks to recreate these spaces for these children and these neighborhoods. We didn't want to just go out and ask people. We wanted to have a scientific approach. So after we found out what these 215 in terms of lack of investment, we started looking at population density, looked at that potential for growth, and then we looked at the poverty level, and we were able to go from 215 down to 134, and then staff went out to look at each and every one to find out which one were near schools or public housing, so we could begin to make sure the parks that we start with are hitting the greatest need. And so there are the 134 parks. The gray area is showing all the the neighborhoods and the characteristics that we looked at, and you can see from all the dots the number of parks throughout our city that were just hiding in plain sight and did not get the proper investment. And that's where we felt we had to focus our attention first. And so it's $130 million, 35 parks. We're also going to do quick fixes in 55 parks, doing fences and painting, because we can't wait the 3 years to do a total renovation. So we're able to affect at least 60 communities within the next year. That is our goal, to start to address this issue of equity. And it's not just a capital investment. We're doing some of the targeted improvements, but we also want to maximize resources through maintenance, because to me it's not just building and maintaining, but also working in the community to build those stewards to help care for those parks. So that's also part of this component. It's what makes parks strong. It's not just building, it's maintaining, but it's also nurturing those parks. And we can't just do it on the government side. We have to get those public stakeholders to help embrace this new paradigm going forward. So what is the impact of this program? Those 35 projects provide improved park amenities to 220,000 New Yorkers that live within a 10-mile walk of those parks. It will cover and address over 65 acres of urban parkland. As I stated, it'll impact 60 individual communities. And when you total up the 35 parks plus the 55 site improvements, we will be able to impact and affect and bring resources to 3.2 million New Yorkers over the next 3 years and beyond. And again, if you see the population will be affected, it'll be 36% that live below the poverty line and 41% are children under 18. Again, it's important that we build great memories for future generations, and this is our way that we plan to do it. What I'm also excited about, you can now go online. We did launch this exciting new planning and development focus. You can now see exactly how we're building the future of our park system. Before, this did not exist on our website. So now we want to show the public exactly what their tax dollars, the planning underway to help build the next generation of parks. This capital project tracking system I mentioned is now underway. It was launched about 2 weeks ago. And now the public can now track the 400 active projects we have going on right now. And it has a little bar so you can see exactly where it sits. So for the first time, the public can track what's going on, find out more about the park. It's searchable by city, by neighborhood, by community board. And it's our way to be more transparent, so now understand how the project is moving through the system. And as I stated, we currently have over 400 active projects in our city totaling $740 million worth of investment. And that is my focus, and our goal is to help streamline the process. Right now it's 4 years. We want to cut it to 3 and hopefully to 2.5 so that we can provide these needed assets to New Yorkers sooner and quicker than we had before. And here's the process now that we've started in terms of streamlining, and you hear more about this in the future. And so I also want to remind you, while we're doing all these other things, we're focusing on all these other elements. I just named a few. Here are some of the others. Build and maintain, as I mentioned. We're trying to be very innovative on how we maintain our parks. When people say equity, very often is how you care for our parks. And I want to differentiate between that word maintain and the word care, because I don't think maintain does it justice when it comes to parks. I have a 16-year-old daughter. If I tell her I want to maintain you, I have a feeling my little 6-year-old will have some issues. I want to care for her and nurture her, and I think maintain, when it comes to parks, just doesn't do it justice, and we want to change our approach about how we nurture, sustain, and care for our parks. But maintenance is as important as building. And very often we hear exciting ideas about new projects, and it's always build, build, build. But to me, it's also important that we maintain that asset, make sure it's up to date, and we're able to replace it in the appropriate time. So here are some of the other exciting initiatives that are underway. And with that, I thank you, and I look forward to an exciting 8 years really recreating a 21st century park system with you. Thank you very much.